Warm welcome to everyone to today's session on how to make your OA books more accessible and why it matters. My name's Lucy Barnes. I'm Senior Editor and Outreach Coordinator at Open Book Publishers, which is a scholar-led non-profit open access book publisher based in the UK. And I'm also one of the coordinators of the Open Access Books Network, which is hosting today's session. I'm just going to say a few words about why we wanted to host a session on this topic. Then I'm going to run through some housekeeping, introduce our speakers, and then we'll get properly underway. So it makes complete sense for accessibility to be a part of open access. And I think it's really important to take seriously the question about whether content is truly open if people with disabilities are unable to access it. But making content accessible requires additional knowledge and processes that can be a challenge, particularly for smaller presses. So we're going to talk about the practical resources that exist to inform and help publishers who want to make their open access books more accessible for all readers. And we're also going to hear from a publisher who will explain how they've taken on this challenge step by step. There's going to be lots of time for questions. We're going to have the presentations and then there'll be some dedicated time for Q&A. And hopefully at the end of this session, making open access books more accessible will seem more achievable. So just some quick housekeeping points. Please stay muted unless you're speaking. If you have questions, and hopefully there'll be lots, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that. Or you can use the raise hand function in Zoom to ask a question verbally. As I mentioned, today's event is being recorded, and the recording will be shared probably later this week or next week, more likely next week, I think, via our mailing list and our socials. And just a few words about the Open Access Books Network, which is hosting today's session. I'll just drop a link in the chat as well. So the Open Access Books Network is a community for anyone who wants to discuss and learn about open access books to do so. Doesn't matter what role you have in the scholarly communications ecosystem, if you're a publisher, a librarian, a researcher, author, funder, policymaker, infrastructure provider, or if you don't really recognise yourself in any of those roles, but you're interested in open access books, then this is a place that you can come and find out more about them. We host free events like this one. We publish blog posts on different topics. We have pages of resources that are aimed at different groups. So you can join our mailing list. You can find us on Knowledge Commons and Blue Sky, visit our website. And you can also join our Operas working group if you're really interested to do so. We have a great group of people within that working group with a lot of knowledge and expertise who feed into our activities. So yeah, feel free to take a look at that if you're interested. And if you want to get in touch with us for any reason, if you want to propose your own event or blog or anything else, then just email info@oabooksnetwork.org and myself and my fellow coordinators will get back to you. So today's agenda, I'm almost coming to the end of the welcome, you'll be glad to hear. And then we'll hear from our three speakers. We'll have about 10 minutes each from them. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards. So our three speakers, we have Joanne Fitzpatrick, who works on the accessibility work package of the COPIM Open Book Futures project, and she's part of the open research team at Lancaster University Library. She's the founding co-chair and director of the award-winning community interest company NLISN, which is the Neurodivergent Library and Information Staff Network. And she's also co-chair of Lancaster University's Disabled Employee Network. Richard Orme is the Chief Executive of the DAISY Consortium, which is a global organisation dedicated to creating accessible publishing technologies and ensuring equal access to information for people with print disabilities. And James Rice is a partner at the White Horse Press, a small family-run publisher of scholarly books and journals that explore environmental perspectives in the humanities and social sciences. James was new to publishing when he joined the press about 5 years ago, after having worked for many years with cultural cinemas and film festivals, where improving accessibility is similarly a major concern. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and I'll hand over to Jo to begin.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to share my slides again. Okay, hopefully you can see that okay.
Yes, we can.
Fab. All right, thank you. So I'm going to talk to you today about something that we've been calling open book accessibility. and the work that we've done for the COPIM Open Book Futures Research Project, which you may or may not have heard of. But just to introduce myself, as Lucy said, I'm Joanne Fitzpatrick. I work at Lancaster University and I'm part of the COPIM Open Book Futures Project. So this is a research project that's funded by Research England and Arcadia that seeks to create the open infrastructures needed to deliver open monographs. So I work on work package 5, accessibility, and I've been working full time on this project for 20 months. The project actually concludes in a couple of days on April 30th after 6 years. So you can see the work of the whole project, excuse me, at copim.pub. And we've documented the progress of our work on the blog there under the accessibility tag. And I'll put some of these links in the chat after for you to click on directly. But you can also see our guidance and full work package deliverables at this open book accessibility guidance link, which will take you to Zenodo. And we also have a couple of mailing lists on the go to continue the conversation after we're finished. A general one for all things COPIM, which has been active, and our accessibility for small publishers based one, which hasn't taken off yet, but we'll see what happens after the project ends. And today I'm going to talk to you about small publishers and accessibility and give a short overview of our guidance that we've produced for them. So here's what we know on our work package about small publishers and accessibility. Most of the publishers that we work with on the project value open access principles. So I've called this access and accessibility. It's a lot like sense and sensibility, isn't it? But what we left is that despite most scholar-led presses being exempt from legislation, they really care about making things accessible. They see it as part of their existing values of removing barriers to accessing scholarly books. And despite having significant budget and capacity challenges, they often manage to make most content mostly accessible. And also, despite being exempt within legislation from either being a micro organisation or this work being an undue burden in many but not all cases, they still do accessibility because they want to. So we created these open book accessibility principles that capture this sentiment, which you can see on our COPIM Compass website and also on the Zenodo link. And hopefully you can see this web browser that I've just put over the slides okay, because here's our principles as they appear. Can you see that okay, Lucy? Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Nodding. Yeah. That is good. So here's our principles. And I won't go through all of these. And as I say, I'll put the link in the chat for you to have a good look at those. But just the first one, access hasn't been fully provided to a research output until it's accessible. These were broadly captured from consultations with publishers, capturing what their sentiments were in a set of principles. So just to continue, there are some other pressures to engage with accessibility. So even where legal minimum accessibility standards can't be achieved, small publishers need to communicate about accessibility. Sometimes the way they are funded is dependent on this communication. So, for example, producing what's called a VPAT, which you might be familiar with, a voluntary product accessibility template. So sometimes libraries will request this who are thinking of subscribing or investing in the press. Or some presses also have to evidence disproportionate burden because you're not actually exempt in a lot of legislative acts until you can evidence that. So not evidencing the exemption will mean you're still subject to something that would threaten the press's financial existence. So this communicating on accessibility is central. Also, metadata is a major part of a publisher's life and a major part of the Open Book Futures project as well. And as you probably know, metadata is also important for accessibility. It's important for the end users or the readers, which for the publishers we work with are the research communities that give rise to the press's existence to begin with. So another reason why accessibility is still important outside of legislation and standards is because we love metadata. And finally, to expand on the importance of end users to small scholarly publishers. So this type of publisher essentially do publishing by research communities for research communities. They don't have the same access to print disabled end user testing that larger publishers do. They don't have the funding for it, but their communities are central to what they're doing. So they know they also care about accessibility for this reason. And they are interested in further to support to fill that gap of accessing end user testing. So I'll give you a quick overview of our recommendations before my time is up. We've got these short-term opening tasks to get presses up and running and communicating about accessibility as it stands for them now, so they can carry on operating and engaging with various stakeholders as needed. So the three recommendations that we have are exemptions, so determining whether the press is actually exempt or not, and evidencing that is an important first step. So just some broad information about exemptions. In the EU, micro organisations are automatically exempt, and that is defined in legislation. So less than 10 employees and a turnover of less than 2 million euros, you will be automatically exempt from legislation. Everywhere else generally has a disproportionate or undue burden exemption as well, which might apply. But most of the time that needs evidencing, as I say. Otherwise, legislation does apply, and that is incredibly general speaking across legislation that operates across the world. Excuse me. So the other recommendations we have are to complete a VPAT, which I mentioned already. But why do we recommend that? So it's quite simple to complete an initial VPAT if you base the information in there on what you already know about your own publishing workflows. Libraries in the US will probably ask for one, so you'll be able to engage with librarians there with no problems if you have that already to hand. You only need to do this once, so one VPAT to describe your whole press and its entire output. And like I say, there doesn't need to be any special auditing done according to our recommendations anyway, just to get that initial, what we call an initial VPAT together. So a VPAT without full auditing. You can refer to a VPAT afterwards to complete further work, and you can update it later on as well, once you've done some more auditing of the accessibility of your content. And then finally, we recommend an accessibility statement because it's often a legal requirement, although not always, but it does also communicate with your readership and community. And you can use the VPAT details to construct it. And that's it. That's what we recommend to get presses up and running. We also have some fuller and longer term guidance, which we've published as a knowledge base on the Cope and Compass webpage, and it forms our research outputs on Zenodo, which I'll link to in the chat in a moment. And just to show you on the knowledge base, it's slightly easier to see it on here. We've got this short-term accessibility to start with. The long-term accessibility work that we've done is in these 5 categories. So plan, check, learn, communicate, and evidence. And evidence contains those principles I've already shared. So a couple of important points within here. You can take a browse of this in your own time. But within plan, we've got our own planning model to help small presses achieve accessible outputs in the long term. And within check, we've got a custom auditing tool that is context specific to open access books produced by small publishers. There's also collated and summarized guidance in all the sections and as I say, the principles as well, which I've already shared. And just to finish up, here's some details of what that long-term planning tool looks like. It's called 10 SOAPs because it's got 10 steps within it. We've got 10 steps grouped into these 4 sections here that have either got 2 or 3 of the steps associated with them. And each of these steps comes with a list of tasks. So some of these tasks are recommended and some are optional. So just a couple of examples of the tasks in there, just to let you know, give you a flavour of what's in there within the time that we've got today. Some examples are to identify sources of suitable accessibility training, or to ensure the whole press is aware that they need to engage with accessibility tasks. So there's a list of tasks that could be considered for the press. And the full list of tasks is available on our research outputs. And to give you an idea of how many tasks there are on there, because it looks a bit overwhelming when you see it, but there's 30 tasks in total. And I think it's a split of 12 and 18 between recommended and optional. So we're just looking to make long-term planning for accessibility manageable. And I'll leave it there so there's enough time for questions and enough time for everyone else to speak. So if you have any questions, I can take those later on in the call, or if we don't have time for those, either you can email me, and don't forget the two if you do email me. But that's me done. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. That's great. And next we have Richard. Hopefully, yes, we do. Would you like to share some slides? Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great. Lovely to follow on from Joanne there. So in this short presentation, I'll talk about tools and resources from the DAISY Consortium. But before I jump into that, I'll also talk about people with print disabilities. That's, after all, why we're here. So I'll skip past the long introduction about who we are as DAISY Consortium. Basically, we're a non-profit organisation, and we're all focused on access to information for people with disabilities. And our relevance to this group is that we develop and steward standards that make accessible publishing and reading possible. We produce guidelines and best practices. You'll hear about that in a moment. We build free and open source tools. You'll hear more about those as well. And also, by working with technology partners, we build accessibility into mainstream products so that the tools you use, if they're mainstream tools, the tools that people with print disabilities might use, they already have accessibility in there to take advantage of accessible content that you might produce. But before jumping into all sorts of things and lists of links with accessible guidelines and tools and so on, let's just take a moment to get on the same page about who people are with print disabilities. And when we talk about people with print disabilities, we're not talking about people with disabilities generally. We're talking about people who basically are unable to effectively read print because of a visual, a perceptual, developmental, cognitive, or learning disability. So I'll go through some examples of this in a moment, but there are people who have disabilities who would not consider themselves to be print disabled, and there are people with print disabilities who would not consider themselves to be disabled. So just a bit of clarity around that term. But if we meet some people with print disabilities, often people think about folk with low vision, and folk with low vision would benefit from being able to increase the size of the text, maybe to have a higher contrast, and to make the typeface something that suits them well. And visual impairment is a very varied thing. So there are some slides here that kind of give an impression about the variability of sight loss. So someone with cataracts, for example, they may see a page that is, or a screen that is washed out and blurry. Someone with glaucoma or retinitis pigmentosa may have a restricted field of vision, so they're only seeing a few words at a time, and things like tracking the line they're reading may be challenging for them. Someone with diabetic retinopathy may have effectively lost patches within their vision, so they're able to see some words clearly and not others, and their brain may not make it easy for them to understand where they're missing words. And someone with macular degeneration, which is actually the leading cause of sight loss in the Western world, age-related macular degeneration, that's a loss of vision in the center. So folk who have vision loss may then, as I mentioned, benefit from larger text, the ability to be able to increase the size of the text and images they're reading, to change the typeface for one that's easier for them to read. They may find certain colors are much easier than others, also adjusting the line spacing. I mentioned the tracking issue that exists for some folk. And some folk with vision loss, even though they're able to read the print, they may make use of read aloud to reduce the strain on their vision. For people who don't see the print well enough at all, they will use something we call a screen reader, and they may use it as a combination with magnified text. And there are screen readers available on the desktop computers, laptop computers, smartphones, and so on. They read the text that's on the screen, but the text on the screen has to be put together in a way that makes it easy for them. And if you get the deck after the session, there's some video in here so you can experience a screen reader reading through a book. There's also electronic braille. So when we talk about braille access to ebooks, you may be curious about how that works. Well, this is typically done using a device which, so I have one here, but even better, I have a video. There are little plastic pins that rise up on the display to form the various braille characters. And as someone then reads, they're able to feel the different characters and they move to the next line or word or something like that. And they're able to read the next line. There's usually a button on the display. This person is pressing it with their thumb to read the next bit. And there may be some braille buttons. You see those on this display here. And someone might be able to use that to jump to the table of contents, to be able to move to the next heading, that kind of thing. Folk with dyslexia and other learning differences would be considered to have a print disability as well, and they may benefit from being able to customize the text layout and use read aloud. People with dyslexia will often have slightly larger print. They may personalize the colors, looking for less of a kind of glary, high contrast experience. They may have a preferred font. The research says that shorter line length is often useful for people, as is increasing the line spacing. And in some reading tools, they may benefit from being able to mask the surrounding text. And then lastly, in this little tour of people with print disabilities, folk with physical disabilities who have problems holding a book or turning the pages would be considered to be print disabled. And they may use some other solutions such as voice input or switch access to be able to navigate around an ebook or a digital publication. And again, this is where things like navigation control that's built into the content. So they're able to jump between headings, use a rich table of contents to be able to jump to page numbers, and this kind of thing all makes for a much more readable experience. So for those folk that are making publications, what kind of tools are available for people to do that? And we, as Daisy, we produce free and open source tools. And maybe in the Q&A, we can talk about the tools that you use now and how these might interact with them. So I've put up a few that I considered might be useful to you. The first is one called Word2EPUB. So I know some smaller publishers have used this. They may use InDesign, but some of them find it easier to recreate the title from the Word manuscript and then create an EPUB using this very simple to use Word plugin. Just goes on the ribbon and you can create an accessible EPUB from that. It generates all the kind of table of contents and page numbers and all those sorts of things for you. Another tool that we have is called the Daisy Pipeline. This is a tool that is a whole kind of Swiss Army box of different conversions and solutions. And with something like this, what you could do, for example, is to take an existing EPUB that you have and you can turn it into a book that has synchronized audio and text together. You can point it at the text-to-speech you have on your computer to generate this, or you can make use of some of the amazing voices that now exist in the cloud from Google and Microsoft and Amazon and so on, although you'll require an API key and an account for that. But that's a tool that some folk find useful to create audiobooks or full media books of the text and the audio synchronized together. When you make an accessible ebook, and people talk about what is accessibility, the first thing we say is an accessible book is first and foremost a valid book, valid against the standards, and the W3C has a tool called EPUB Check for validating EPUBs, and that is maintained and developed by the DAISY Consortium. The second tool I'll mention is one called ACE by DAISY. ACE is the accessibility checker for EPUB, and this is a great tool. It's extensively used all around the world by big and small publishers, aggregators, authors, and platforms. And this can help you identify accessibility issues in EPUBs. It'll help you review the image descriptions, see whether you have structure issues, identify if there are coding issues there as well. Smart is a much more in-depth, interactive, web-based tool. This isn't something that you would run on every EPUB, but you would look at when you're examining the output from a workflow. This guides a person who is themselves an expert in going through and checking whether or not that EPUB meets all the conformance that you choose, which standard you're meeting. It guides you through as to what that standard relates to, how you might test it, allows you to capture the results, and will generate an accessibility report for you at the end. It'll also generate accessibility metadata for you, or metadata data, it says on this slide. I'll fix that. And then lastly, everyone's talking about AI these days. DAISY Consortium has a tool from our DAISY Labs. So that's recognizing things are changing all the time. FIDO has been used for a year now by DAISY members, and it helps them when they are making, improving, or converting publications. And it'll help them with things such as converting from PDF to reflowable format, adding image descriptions, detecting language changes and marking them up, and more. This tool has now become available to anyone to use, but you will need some AI services with an API key in order to make use of it. We can talk about that more if you have questions. And again, in the deck, there are links to all of these tools and little videos about them as well. And then the last little bit, then I'm going to talk about resources from DAISY, and I'm going to mention just 4. So the first is DAISY Learning. I have whistled through the little section about who are people with print disabilities and what is accessible publishing. There is a course on DAISY Learning, which you can reach at learning.daisy.org. It's called Accessible Publishing Concepts, or something very close to that. And that talks through who are people with print disabilities, what it actually is accessible publishing, giving you some examples, giving you a business case. It's a kind of guided tour through that kind of process. You can save your place and come back to it. It should take less than 3 hours to go through that course. It's, of course, free. Inclusivepublishing.org is a hub of lots and lots of articles, links to resources, videos, and so on, all about accessible publishing. And one of the links is the Accessible Publishing Knowledge Base. This is actually linked from those other tools that I mentioned, like ACE by DAISY and SMART. Accessible Publishing Knowledge Base is really the authoritative know-how place on the web where you can go to find out if you have a question about how to do a footnote, or what an image description should be, or how to do an extended description, or include mathematics contents, all those sorts of things. So the Accessible Publishing Knowledge Base, again, is extensively utilized by publishers, big and small, and is always kept up to date. And lastly, there's the webinar library of probably approaching 60 hours of video. For each of those webinars that we do, we extract the useful links. We produce an article to summarize it. We produce the deck for you. So if you're interested in watching, I don't know, 7 hours probably on image descriptions, or seeing a webinar all about InDesign, although that'll be out of date now because there's been lots of progress there, take a look at our webinar library. So that's it from me in terms of a quick tour around the table. As I say, in the deck, there are links to all these things and some extra bonus videos that we haven't had a chance to show you because we're going to leave time for questions. Okay, that's it for me.
Thanks, Richard. That's great. And I think it was particularly useful to see some of the different examples of reasons why people might have accessibility needs, because I think there's an awful lot of information out there. There's a lot of regulation and rules, and I think it's easy to get lost among all that and just sort of forget why we're actually bothering with this in the first place. So I think that was particularly useful, and those links will be great as well. So next, we're going to hear from James Rice, who's going to talk about how, as a publisher, they've begun to implement accessibility steps at Whitehorse Press.
Great, thank you. I'll just share my slides. Can you see my slide?
Yes, looks good.
Great. Yes, so I'm James Rice from the Whitehorse Press. I'll quickly just start by giving a bit of background. Let me move that out of so I can actually see my slides. Sorry. Yeah, just a bit of background about us as a publisher. We're pretty small, so I realize most people on the call have perhaps not heard of us, unless you happen to be an environmental historian. My slide's not progressing, actually. There we are. Yeah, good. So we're a very small family-run scholarly press. The company was established in the early 1990s in the Western Isles of Scotland by my aunt and uncle, Alice and Andrew. We publish books and journals on environment and society. So what we mean by that is social sciences research and humanities research, but all through an environmental lens, so about human and environment interactions. We currently have 6 journals and about 5 books a year. Our ambition is limited to growing that to maybe like 8 journals and 8 books a year. That's probably about the biggest we'd ever want to be. We don't have any staff. It's just us. We work as a small partnership, and we have a few freelancers who help us out with some of the production. We're now more than 90% open access for new content. We decided to make the pivot to open access about 2 years ago, after 30 odd years as a traditional publisher. And we've made pretty good progress. I think that we're not 100% there, but getting there. No, again, my slide's not progressing. How do I do this?
If you click into it, you could hit spacebar.
I'll click into it. There we go. Okay, yeah, sorry for that. This is just a few recent journal issue covers to give you a flavor for what we do. All of these journals are open for this year. So why does improving access matter to us as a publisher? Probably, I think, for the same reasons as it matters to everyone else, or I mean to other presses at least. I would imagine it's quite similar anyway. Starting, of course, from a values position, we just think that any kind of avoidable exclusion is unfair. So we wish on a personal and a kind of company basis to address that where we can. Also in our case, and probably for a lot of other presses as well, there's a kind of mission aspect as well. So we support environmental perspectives in the social sciences in large part because we want to try to contribute in some way to addressing the really serious environmental problems that affect all of us. And our view is that the more people who read what we publish, the likelier it is that we might actually have some kind of impact. And so removing barriers to readership helps us to basically just maximize readership and therefore hopefully deliver better against our mission. Also, just at a business level, it's clearly increasingly important to our stakeholders, be they customers or other sorts of supporters, that accessibility be a priority, and important to our ability to continue attracting and retaining support that we prioritize that. That's obviously in the context of new legislation coming in the EU and the US and perhaps elsewhere. In our case, I think we're so small that we probably would be eligible for any kind of exemptions and exceptions that are available, but whether or not that matters is another question. Another angle on this in our thinking is that opening access in a kind of open access way motivates accessibility. It brings it up the list of priorities, or it has done for us anyway. Our gated usage has never been huge. What we publish is really relevant, but it's quite niche content. We work with very particular scholarly fields, and we don't have like a huge marketing capacity to go out and try to like push our publications out beyond the kind of scholarly communities who are interested in them. Open access usage, however, is much higher. So when we flip gated content to open access, we see usage increase by as much as 10 times. Born away content reaches similar levels. So as we've gone more and more open access, that means we have a larger readership, and we think that increases accessibility needs, because the more readers we have overall, the higher the likelihood that some of them will benefit from anything we can do to improve accessibility. So what have we done? Where did we start? So we first started thinking about accessibility a bit more than we had done previously in kind of early 2024. At that point, as I said, most production was handled in-house, and we had a few freelancers. PDF was our dominant format. It had really been our only online format until around about that time. We were not doing any EPUBs, and over on the journal side, we were just starting to do reflowable options for a couple of journals. It was really a PDF dominant environment. And we had multiple accessibility limitations across all our publications. Our websites also had a whole range of different accessibility problems. But with all of this being the case, we had only a partial understanding of what the problem was. We knew at the top line level that there was a problem, that what we were doing was not really fully accessible. But we didn't kind of understand what all the different specific components were or the particular things that we would need to fix in order to really properly improve the situation. So what did we do? In the early phase, so kind of from early 2024 into the first part of last year, we did some investigations as best we could. We did make some improvements, but I would say that it was not wide spectrum progress. So one thing, for example, we did was we started doing alt text for images just as a matter of routine. That's better to do it than not, but there were so many other problems that we weren't really addressing. We were busy with other things. I think capacity is a challenge for everybody in any kind of professional context, but certainly in a very, very small company like ours, it can be really hard to find significant blocks of time to put into developmental projects of any kind. So that being the case, we kind of did what we could, but we kind of took comfort in the thinking that there were going to be these legal exemptions, and so at least we wouldn't get sort of direct severe consequences if we weren't fully compliant with the incoming standards. But kind of late summer last year, some communication from the Open Book Collective, in which we are happily a member, began to focus our minds a little bit on the problem a bit more. They clarified that there was really an increasing sense of urgency or priority from the kind of stakeholders they were dealing with in the context of the Open Book Collective, and that it was kind of clear to us that that was going to apply not just in the OBC context, but elsewhere where we need to secure and maintain support. And in parallel with that, then there was support that started becoming available to help us understand what the pathway forward might look like to actually begin to properly address some of the problems we had. And the OBC, for example, held a couple of really useful webinars. Joanne talked earlier about the online resources that the OBF made. Those were so helpful, like really practical, pragmatic guidance that helped us understand where we had to go. So with those two things happening in tandem, the pressure rising a little bit, but also the pathway coming into focus a little bit, we decided really to make a real push for it in autumn of last year. And we said, okay, well, forget about exemptions. The reasons for improvement are compelling regardless. So we're going to do it. And so we began to prioritize the technical work. And that meant making, well, basically we just made the time to do it, making a big push from kind of September, October last year. We started with planning. We drafted a roadmap and a books VPAT. And doing that as a first step really helped us understand where we had to go even more fully, because it broke the problem down into discrete technical pieces. And that led into just research on like actual technical research about what we had to do to resolve certain kinds of problems in our workflows. We started from the position that we wanted to keep our existing systems and workflows and wherever possible just adapt them. We could have just torn everything down and rebuilt from scratch, but that seemed not very appealing and probably not very feasible. So having come to the technical understanding by just researching all the individual bits, we then started just changing and extending our in-house workflows or creating new work streams where needed. And we did that in a pretty incremental way, and we brought each thing online just as we had solved it, really. And that made it a lot more manageable. And once we dealt with our in-house production, we rolled that out to our few freelance supporters as well who deal with production work. In parallel with all this, we were looking at backset remediation feasibility. As probably for many presses, proportionally, in proportional terms, our backset is a large amount. Like, I don't think we could actually remediate all of that in-house on anything like a decent timescale. So we have explored with a technical provider what the practicalities and the costs might be of actually getting some help with that, some external help. And that proof of concept work has gone well. And then we still just have the mountain of work to do. So where are we now? Production is still handled by the same in-house and freelance people. We have not had to change who we are or who we work with. We're hitting, we think, WCAG 2.2 AA or better across all our new publications. That goes for PDFs. We still do PDFs of everything we publish, but we also now offer accessible EPUBs for all our new books, all of them checked in Ace by Daisy. Those are alongside the PDFs for the books. And we also have a reflowable option as well as PDF for all new journal articles. That's normally not EPUB, that's usually HTML or XML, depending on the situation. We have VPATs for our books and journals, not yet for the website. I still have to do that. Our website is better than it was, but there are still some problems there. Some of them are pretty thorny to fix. So that remains something we need to focus a bit more on and try to make it better. And backside remediation remains a challenge, but it's mainly a budgetary challenge at this stage. We know what would need to be done. We just don't have enough money to just press go and do it all right now. Here are a few EPUBs we made, and they actually work as EPUBs, which we're happy about, and they are accessible. So there we are. Final observations. So an incremental approach has been really key. Breaking the challenge down into pieces was essential. I don't think we could have done it without, didn't really even have our heads around what needed to happen until we did that. Drafting a roadmap in VPATs really helped with that process. Collective support and problem solving is important. I spoke about the OBC, the Open Book Collective webinar, and that Open Book Futures guidance, online guidance was super helpful. Another example is, for example, EMS Press, who do maths research. They helped us set an approach to alt text for maths formulae. That's an edge case for us, but it does come up. And so it was great to be able to call on, talk to some experts who really know what to do with that kind of thing. There's still a long way to go. So we need to improve the website. We need to address other edge cases, for example, multimedia content. Occasionally we have that, and we're not really at the moment well positioned to make that accessible. We need to make further improvements to primary formats. And also, actually, we need to I guess, embed accessibility more in our mindsets. And the reason I say that is I realized after this webinar started that I neglected to put this PowerPoint through an accessibility checker. And so I think it's possibly not as accessible as it might be. So I hope that's not been frustrating for anybody. But I think that's just an example of how we need to begin to move out beyond just the publications in our company and think about other forms of communication, which where people might benefit from more focus on accessibility, maybe in our social media as well. We're not really consistently, for example, adding alt text to images in Blue Sky and Facebook. We probably need to start doing that as a matter of routine. So there's a lot still to do, but we do know now much more about what that's left to do, and we have a plan of sorts to go into it. So thank you for listening, and we're happy to speak with everyone in the Q&A.
Thanks, James. That's great. Really useful to hear about how a publisher has begun tackling this. So I encourage all of the audience to put any questions in the chat. I also see that Marcus is crowdsourcing other free tools that are available. So if you know of any that we've not mentioned, please put them in the chat there. And we have a question from Emily Carter, who says, with VPATs, I'm part of a developing university press publisher, and I feel unclear. Is the expectation to have a VPAT of a system you're using for publishing, and for each publication type you begin to publish, such as books or conference papers? So how do you decide what you need a VPAT for? I don't know who wants to tackle that one, Joe?
Do you want me to jump in with that one? Because we've thought carefully about VPATs and what we're actually advising publishers to do. And some of the presses we've worked with are university presses. Some advice I can give is that the VPAT is about anything that you're doing yourself. So in the question, if it's about a system that you're using for publishing, the system that you've procured will probably have a VPAT done themselves. So you don't need to redo that work. So it's anything that you're producing, which is likely going to be the content itself and the website that it sits on. And then if it's a university press, the website itself is probably covered by the institution's own statements and VPATs. It probably uses the same content management system, perhaps. So it's just the accessible content that you need to look at. And then deciding on how you capture that on a VPAT. Excuse me. So you can split that up in any way that makes sense to yourself and your workflows. So if you've got very different workflows, books and conference papers, for example, then those can be described separately. There's a box and you could just write books and how that's handled, and then conference papers. Or another useful way is doing it by file type. So you might have a very different workflow for different file types. So it's however that makes sense to you. Hopefully that's helpful.
In our case, it really made sense for the reasons Joanne was describing. Just because our workflow for books and journals and how they're distributed and hosted is really very different. So it just made sense to split it up. We did consider doing one giant combined one, but I'm glad in retrospect that we did make that split.
Thank you. Richard, do you have anything to add?
Not on this particular piece. I mean, I've always got something to add. I've just put in the chat. James, you'll be pleased to know that we have a course on PowerPoint presentations, so you can quickly whiz through that. Hopefully that'll help.
I shall do that this week. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
So, sorry, Richard, were you gonna add a point there?
I don't know if we have any other questions in the
You took
queue.
a breath like you were about to.
So you talked to, I love the way you put it there, James, as the kind of incremental approach. This is well recognized, I think, as publishers kind of do this. We often hear that phrase, accessibility is a journey. So it's not like 1 minute you're not accessible and the next minute you are. It's always about kind of thinking about what you can do next. But the other reason it's a journey is because things change, you know, the technologies that change, the possibilities change. So you talked then, for example, about alt text for math images. So now that's not actually the recommended way to do it. The recommended way to do it is with MathML. There's a long list of reasons why that's actually a better kind of experience. And I think we should be able to find a little article or something in the knowledge base that speaks to that. So that was just kind of, I'm trying to reinforce the point that don't be intimidated by it looking kind of like, oh my goodness, we're going to have to boil the ocean. Just identify what can be done within your own organization and move on that, because there's always going to be something next month or next year. So yeah, that was intended to illustrate that.
And I would just say, just from a publisher perspective, having been through the process of making what I described as kind of a big push in recent months, it now seems not a problematic thing if we need to change the way we do alt text or however we handle math formula. So I now need to find out what the better way is, and we can then go change that. But having now that we've kind of got our bearings in it by having really focused on it for a few months. It becomes much less like daunting, I suppose, to then begin to make other improvements. Just as and when we find out of wherever we can find out that something can be done better, great. We'll try to improve it. Yeah.
So please add more questions if you have them. But I have a question about values and open access and accessibility, because I think all of you at different points in your presentations mentioned values. And you're all also talking about the sort of interplay between accessibility and open access. And I can think of various ways in which open access kind of lends itself to accessibility. So, for example, if you're not having to access content in a particular environment because it's open, then you might be more easily able to apply accessibility aids to help you engage with it. So I wondered if any of you wanted to talk more about this kind of harmony between the values of open access and accessibility. Bit of an open question, but whoever would like to go first.
Well, I'll jump in. So I was really pleased when I was approached to maybe speak in this webinar, because the values of open access and the values of the DAISY Consortium and accessible publishing and reading seem there's a big overlap. I guess we're both of these missions are about removing barriers between content and readers. Maybe in the case of open access, it's about kind of economic barriers or rights barriers or something. And in the case of us, it's kind of formats, adaptability, accessibility, usability kind of barriers. But I think there's a lot of overlap there. And when it comes to the great progress, so there has been really significant progress in the commercial publishing. I don't know what the right terminology is for publishing that isn't open access, and I don't want to put my foot in it, but on the other side of the coin, or whatever, often publications are produced within an ecosystem, within what's sometimes referred to as a walled garden. And then the person is very reliant on using that ecosystem, the accessibility features that either come with that or that will play nicely in that environment. And, you know, there are platforms and technology providers have made a lot of progress, but the real kind of freedom, I suppose, of access comes when someone is able to choose to read it in the way that suits them. So in the case of someone with a disability, that might be, I want to actually listen to this content through audio, and in order to do that, I need to put it through this particular tool. So behind me, I have a whole bunch of little kind of audio players, holding them up to the camera. So these have been used in the specialist kind of publishing and reading world for many years. So this one here has all sorts of buttons on there. It has its own text-to-speech built in there. And you might think, well, you can do everything on a smartphone. Why would you do that? But actually, sometimes having a dedicated device with a battery that lasts for weeks, not days, with physical buttons on there, that's actually a good way for someone to read and to be able to put their content on there that isn't kind of harnessed behind some technical protection measure is the way for them to be able to read it. And I lifted up that Braille display earlier. And in order to get something into a format that can be read on a Braille display as a dedicated device rather than kind of connected to a PC or a smartphone, someone needs to be able to put it through some software. And again, it needs to be able to have unfettered access to that file. So yeah, open access isn't only about removing those barriers. Often it means true access for someone to be able to read that content in a way that suits them.
Thanks. James or Joe, did you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight that I've just put in the chat the full list of our principles. And a lot of what you're asking is captured in there. So just to echo what Richard said, in that often accessibility is about usability. So it supports being able to use the ebook in whatever way that you want. Although, of course, the difference between someone with a print disability is that this is about access. They can't access that without those changes. Whereas for usability, it's a preference, which isn't quite as urgent. But it's part of wider usability. And when we think about that as well, it's usability by machines. So not just assistive technology, but other just making your content machine readable. Often a lot of accessibility work overlaps with that, which we've captured in the principles.
Thank you. James?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, I mean, I talked already about how, of course, you know, if there's more readers, then there's more potentially more demand for or more use for accessibility improvements. But I really kind of feel that like moving more towards open access publishing has helped to align lots of different incentives, so everything's pushing in the same direction more than perhaps before, around you know, just trying to remove barriers to readership. In an older world where it was like more print focused than even more print focused than online, let alone open access online, you know, it felt a bit more distant, perhaps even in the short time I've been at the press. Whereas now that we really are not fully open access yet, but getting there, just the nature of the kind of the nature of kind of like running the operation as an open access publisher, and the kinds of partnerships you have and the kind of supporters that we need to form relationships with. It shifts the incentive structure a little bit in a way that aligns our like more raw business incentives with what we kind of personally want to be doing anyway. So it like brings the ethical and business interests more in line. I don't know if that makes sense, but that would be kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And sort of building on that point, I'm curious about the sort of motivations, I suppose, for accessibility. I mean, everyone's emphasized very strongly the kind of values-driven side of things. And there's sort of the carrot and the stick, right? There's the kind of carrot of you could achieve greater accessibility for your books, more people can engage with them in lots of different ways. And then there's also the stick of the kind of legislation. And we've said that often legislation, there might be exemptions for a lot of smaller publishers. So maybe perhaps we could start with you, James. In your case as a press, which was the bigger initial motivation? Was it the concern about the potential legislation impact, or was it the sort of, I suppose, more positive desire to actually make these changes to improve the accessibility of the publications?
Not really the legal compliance side, because we certainly with the EEA, we kind of established pretty early on that we would be eligible for the exemption there. And I think that the legislation does have an effect on it, in as much as like we perceive there to have been a kind of perhaps gradual, or maybe not linear, but an escalation in the degree to which like our customers essentially are wanting presses like us and every other press to prioritize accessibility. And that escalation is, I presume, driven by a mix of different things, including values and mission, but also their response to legislation, and they are not exempt by and large. So I think that the legislation has it's more like a secondary effect in regard to us. I don't quite know how our exemption might work with regard to the ADA, but hopefully we don't need to find out anymore. But I think that something that was a bit not necessarily the whole incentive by any means, but was the sort of the kick in the backside that we needed to really move on it, was the kind of communication, was the communication from OBC, and the kind of growing sense that this was really going to become a bit of an issue in terms of securing support, like the actual financial support for publishing what we want to publish, and so that I think it wasn't that, as I say, by no means the only reason, because there's the values reasons and the mission reasons, and we just think it's a good thing to do, and all of that, and we want more readers, but in terms of like incentives to actually say, well, we really are going to carve out a chunk of significant time to deal with this, and we have to get to grips with it. That was very useful. I mean, good that the OBC sent that, but also they were just reporting the truth.
Yeah,
so
that pressure from librarians.
Yeah.
Thank you. Joe or Richard, do you have any thoughts on this one? Incentives and carrots and sticks.
I think it's best when the people talking about incentives are from the industry or from that sector themselves. Otherwise, I'm standing on the outside, kind of offering an opinion. But what I would say, I mentioned the accessible publishing concepts. There's a very nice piece in there from someone from Taylor and Francis, who does, I think, a great exposition on what they identified as the business drivers for them. And those are legal and financial, but also values based, and about how they and some process benefits for them as well. So yeah, Brianna Walker's a little video in the accessible publishing course, I think, speaks very well to incentives and carrots and sticks. Yeah.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah,
oh, sorry, James. No, I'll go for you first, Joe, and then James after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's only a short edition I've got, so we'll have time for both comments. But yeah, just to add that some more incentives are just increasing that readership in general. So we don't want there to be any economic barriers and to accessing the content, so there shouldn't be any accessibility related barriers either. And there's other barriers to think about, but we'll get to those in the future. But it's all about once I heard the phrase used that, and I've put this in the principles because I thought it was relevant here, that open access is about a book or a piece of scholarly content finding its true audience, not just those who can pay for it. And I've captured that in the principles. It's not just those who can perceive, operate, and understand it either. And I think that's a really nice way of putting it. Also, usage metrics are still important. So where we're moving away from things like citation metrics as being ways to assess the quality of research, we're still interested in assessing the impact and reach. So to maximize usage metrics, that's another key incentive.
Thank you. And then last word to James before we wrap up.
Oh yeah, so I was just going to say, all of that makes good sense, and we've talked about the kind of like various pressures or incentives that can arise internally and externally. But another one that I would observe is just authors. So I mean, obviously our customers are mainly librarians, but we have relationships with authors as well. And while they aren't really necessarily banging down the door demanding accessibility for the most part, they react really well when we tell them what we're doing. Like a lot of them do. So in a sense, that's maybe not a core incentive in all of this for us, but it is another incentive that by and large our authors like their work to be accessible, even if they don't personally need to use those tools or whatever. But yeah.
Great, thank you. Enormous thanks to all three of you, to Joe, to Richard, and to James. And thanks to our audience for coming and for bringing questions and links and all sorts in the chat. As I mentioned, the recording will go out probably next week. So it'll be emailed to you, and it'll also be shared on our socials. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are.